Good morning, everyone. My name is Ross Shabilsky. I am the founder of D20 Studios. We are an indie video game studio based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we are currently developing a game called Summoner's Fate, a turn-based strategy meets deck builder about winning in the most fun, creative ways possible. And today we're going to be doing some more development streaming, giving you guys an inside look at the process for how we are creating this game, giving you a chance as players and spectators to discuss the design with us, to contribute to that development, as we are a proud community driven developer. And we have an exciting episode planned today. We're going to be discussing how to design expandable campaign maps. So just a little bit about our game for those who are new to the show. Summonersfate.com is where you can find out more about our game Summoner's Fate. We are currently in our pre-release, so the game is not officially launched, but is available for purchase and download. If you are so inclined to join us in our development process and play the game before its release, provide your feedback would be awesome. Just a little bit about our game. It's played from the top-down perspective, so you are the player is a personified deity, and the characters of this world look up at you literally, so that you can command them from the sky and decide their destiny as you take them along these various adventures. And we support both a full single-player campaign with a combination of procedural and handcrafted elements, as well as PvP multiplayer. So here's some cool things about the game there. All right. To give you guys some context, last week we had discussed how to design our actual level progression system. So we're kind of in this series of episodes now where we're focusing heavily on our single player aspects of the gameplay in preparation for getting us ready for our worldwide launch. And last week's level progression talked about how we are designing systems that allow the player to both progress in terms of their skills and abilities in the game, gradually getting more power as you explore more of the world, and also how we're using that same system to continually surface progressively more difficult challenges so that at any given point in the game, you feel that your skills are appropriately matched to an appropriate challenge, thus increasing engagement and happiness within the game experience. And as we are closing in the horizon of developing our our next client-based update for the game, one of the key goals we have is that we want a way to be able to add new single-player content without the need for doing client updates. This is very important because the process of doing a client update is very extensive. Depending upon the number of channels you may have for your game, we currently are distributing on 4 channels, 4 platforms. Third-party channels typically will have their own strict requirements, specific timings through which the releases can be made, and many often have review processes. So, for example, to publish to iOS, even while in beta pre-release mode, when you're not even on the App Store officially yet, it's required to go through a review process, and an actual human vets the game update changes and has to approve it. And so this can have various downtimes and delays and can make it very difficult to synchronize various versions, which for us is important since we support multiplayer and want to have synchronicity between all versions. However, with the DLC update, it's possible to make changes to the game without the need for a client update and without the need for review because we are effectively just downloading some new assets and data from our server into the game. And so the update process is incredibly rapid. We're talking, a couple megabytes worth of data tops, and you've got a full-fledged expansion on your hands with new content ready to play. And in a previous episode, we actually were able to successfully add new campaign levels to Summoner's Fate via DLC. But we encountered a bug where it was not actually possible to play the new content unless you reset your data. And this has to do with one of the current mechanisms in the game through which we're storing our play data. And so it became apparent through this discovery process that we need a way to effectively allow the expansion of single player content in the game in a way that makes the surfacing of that new content easily visible and available to the player without the need for special loopholes like uninstalling and reinstalling the app in order to see the new levels. So enter our campaign map, which you can see colorfully illustrated in this picture here. I could probably find a bigger one of that. Let's see. Where's that campaign map? Do I still have a screenshot of it in here? I'm looking for it. Maybe I took it out of there. Maybe I did take it out of there. All right, well, it's this thing. This is sort of more of a visual what our campaign looks like. And now it's not that quite exciting because we haven't got this art integrated to the game yet, but I'm going to take you to the actual game and we'll show you sort of how this experience looks. So I'm going to log myself in. This is the current client build of the game. I'm going to talk about how you can surface new content. So when you come into the game and you've already completed the tutorial, this is sort of where you go. This is the staging area, the campsite. It sort of acts as our main menu for accessing the various components of the game, such as building your deck, which you can do in the cards area, engaging in PvP battles, choosing your team, and oh, look at that, there's a campaign table. So let's take a look and see what this looks like. All right, so yeah, not quite as exciting as our very artistically rendered pirate map that we hope to get into the game at some point in the near future. But what this is doing here is effectively allowing you to select various missions in the game. I'm not sure why there's only 4 missions showing. There should be. Oh, I guess that's right. Okay. All right. So this, for example, just opens up a little modal window that gives you a description of the mission you're about to go on. A squirrel to hurl. When all seems lost, you're gonna go and hurl some squirrels at orcs, and you play the mission. This will take you into effectively our first real single-player campaign / tutorial. And then you've got some other options here. You can play the Lich King in this one. And then we have the 2 new campaigns that we designed previously on the streams. And so these are sort of our first experimental campaigns that are testing a lot of assumptions about how our progression system will work, starting with the low-level character and gradually working your way up as you defeat harder enemies to actually build your deck as you're playing, making choices along the way. And then, of course, we've got Peter's campaign here as well. And so you can kind of see here that what we've done is created a little screen and some buttons that allow you to connect to access our levels, right? So really that's what this stream is about. This stream is about creating a mechanism through which we can surface continually new content. And one of the unique attributes of Summer's Fate that we talk about is how it's an ever-expanding world, that we're constantly adding content to it, constantly adding new missions, new campaigns. And so it's important that we have a way to surface these items to the players so they can access that new content and play the new levels we create. And again, the issue we had previously was that when we made that update, it didn't actually show the 2 new level nodes because of a mechanism with how we're actually storing data right now. So we're going to be working through some of those things, and this is going to be a cool talk because we're going to be designing and developing on the fly. I don't have a specific agenda per se about how we're going to tackle this. I've got some high-level ideas, which is typically how I start when I work on these things. My typical workflow as a developer is to try and come up with goals for the week. My high-level goals for this week is to try and get a new client out. And then I try to isolate things in my master to-do list into a set of tasks I can attempt to create, work on during the day. With any development task, especially when this large, it can be very difficult to isolate all of the particulars of the things you need to go into it. And you start to discuss out loud to yourself and then put to paper the various things you know you need to think about and overcome. And then you just need to take and make a starting point because that first starting point into the task will give you tons more information about the level of scope of work involved, other challenges you might not have thought about, and it'll sort of, that also gets your juices flowing. As you start to complete smaller tasks within the bigger bucket, you start to realize and see more about how the bigger picture comes together. So that's what we're going to attempt to do here. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you my actual work list. I'm going to see if I can switch over here. And we'll go back to the top here. And here we go. So this is kind of what my to-do list looks like. I love using this little notebook application because of the way it very nicely organizes a little tiny list. I'm a tiny list kind of developer. I like to just make little notepad lists, and then at some point I'll archive all my little lists into a Google Doc that I can put on the cloud. So I've got a record of all the work I've done. I can go back and reference if so needed. But let's go ahead and talk about some of the high-level goals I'm attempting to complete today on the stream. So what we're trying to do, high level, is add support for DLC Campaign Edition. So as we create new single player content, new campaigns, new levels, new challenges, new missions, we want a way to be able to surface those to players within the game. And I just showed you a mechanism through which we have to do that, which is that awesome campaign table. Again, not very exciting because it's all gray box programmer art, but nonetheless, it provides a mechanism that we can use. And so we need to program this in a way that will allow new nodes to populate easily. We can lay them out however we like. We can design this however we like. And we want to be able to do this in a way that doesn't require any kind of code changes so that as we make this new content, we can deliver it over the air without the need for those client updates. Okay, so one note I have already, I mentioned the reason we had that bug is because we are actually storing prophecy map definitions. I call these the prophecy maps. Fun side note, Summoner's Fate was originally called Prophecies. It was built as an extension or the next um, game in the series of the Hero Mages games, which is the first game I created, which is the prophecy idea was all about these ideas of micro stories, sort of interesting, really engaging adventures that you could have similar to like a setting at a D&D table. And each time you play, there'd be a unique sort of overarching story theme or mission going on, and the adventure would be sort of ever-changing, randomized with procedural elements, and sort of lightweight. The idea being that you could easily jump into a really exciting adventure, pick up and play, and complete a campaign between 1 and 3 hours with breaks in between, and the ability to rapidly pick up and play micro chunks of that in a 5-minute session on your phone if you so choose, or if you want to binge the whole campaign in an hour or 3 hour setting on your PC. So that's what the prophecies are, and the prophecy map sort of represents this idea. And I showed you earlier that sort of pirate treasure map piece. Let's go back to that website here again to try and connect this more. It's meant to be sort of simple, lightweight, like this. Like this would be the overworld, and these are sort of connecting nodes representing levels or territories. And then we're thinking that these will expand into actual full-on dungeon maps. And everything about the world is also designed to be sort of seamlessly connected. Meltros is here. Hello, Ross, says Meltros. Hello, Meltros, says Ross. Good to have you here with us. We are today talking about designing expandable campaign maps with our upcoming single player client on the cusp for Summoner's Fate. We want to guarantee and lock down a way that we can deliver new campaigns and levels without the troubles we encountered earlier when we did our first DLC campaign update attempt a few weeks ago. So right now I'm just sort of talking through my to-do list. Here it is. And I just sort of defined what the prophecy map was. Okay, so here's some other things in my to-do list here. I love how I talk to myself in the sort of third person, like, consider. It's not even like a to-do list. It's like hey, Ross, I want you to think about when you can start your work today, adding this idea for pagination support for the prophecy maps. And this would allow us even greater levels of experimentation. Yeah, it sure would. So what do I mean by pagination? It'd be the idea that maybe within this, oh, it logged out on me here. Within this campaign here, we've got this, we would have a pagination at the bottom where I could flip through and actually see different maps. And the reason for that is I think there's an interesting opportunity to sort of show a campaign as a series of actually connected levels, which would be kind of cool. Visualize your progress, be able to save your progress along the way, and having ability to like flip these maps would be really nice because it would give us far greater expansion capability than we currently do. So right now the game sort of picks one of these maps. I'm going to show you guys in more detail how these maps are populated and created within the definitions editor and how the game currently selects one. And you're going to kind of see very quickly the problem I see, which is it's very rigid and limited right now. But if we had a way to introduce an entirely new screen here and be able to flip through them, we could have endless numbers of campaigns structured in any number of ways, continuously added to the game with with a lot of ease, as opposed to the rigid structure we have now. So when I say pagination, we're talking about something that would be like this guy at the bottom, where I can open up my thing. Oh, look at that. See, I've got pages of cards. I can flip through them really easily or scroll through them. So imagine if you had entire campaigns full of levels that you could flip through like that. Give us a lot more flexibility and things. So there's that. I'm going to go ahead and put this on here too because I want to show you guys the other side of the map. Okay, so here's like another example of those maps. Let's log out and log back in. So this is something we were working on previously. We're sort of abandoning this, but there's some good usefulness in the structure I've created. This was our procedurally driven campaign map. So what you've got here is another representation of the map I just showed you, but as you can see, it's a lot more expanded. And what we have here is basically a tiered campaign approach where each of these columns represents a level tier, and then you've got these branching paths, which lets you choose sort of a path along the way. And then these might represent, procedural dungeons that have levels, and this could be maybe like, I don't know, a camp or a rest site where you can recover and so forth. And you can see how this can be rolled to create like endless configurations of possible dungeons. Oh, that's interesting how that's crossing like that. That should never be allowed to happen. I'm not sure how this went from here to the next tier. There's definitely some kind of bug there. Not that I'm too worried because again, we're scrapping this whole system, but just interesting to see that bug in there. Weird. Anyway, so that's kind of the idea. Now, what I do like about this is the idea that you could sort of visually represent all of the campaign at once. Now, our goal moving forward is, again, more of a seamless campaign style where it would be much like how the original Legend of Zelda worked, or Link to the Past, if you're familiar with those games, where they have sort of a top-down overworld and the rooms sort of connect seamlessly to each other. That's the idea we're thinking. And so we like this notion that the whole areas of the actual overworld and then dungeons can be connected via actual stitched together levels, and that would become your campaign map eventually. So we might look at attempting to build something like that today. Again, I don't have specific plans other than to discuss with you guys sort of our intent and then explore and just start making some stuff because that's how we learn more. We discuss, think what would be cool, we try things out, we test it and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, and then we go back to the drawing board and build some more. And that's how game dev happens. So there's that. I could probably exit out of this now. I think we're done with this. What else is on our to-do list? Okay, so I note, can we visually represent the levels within the campaign to provide a sense of progress? Yeah, so one of the issues with some of the recent campaigns we built. For example, my recent campaign with Lee the Pyromancer facing off against the undead. I've got 25 levels, and they all go in a big linear chain. And it's a long experience. I'd say it takes about 45 minutes to an hour, usually for the first playthrough of it, to defeat the boss. And so that's a long period of time. And one of the concerns right now is there's not really a good way to track your sense of progress or to be able to back out of it. That's one of the main issues is that because it's all stored as one sort of continuous campaign, there's not a way to take breaks from it or to come back to it or to set a save point. And there's a lot of issues with that design-wise. So here's some considerations. Right now, our game can store save states. So if you are in the middle of a level or a battle and you have to turn off your phone or turn off your computer and come back, it will restore your progress at exactly the point at which you left off, right? But that progress save is contingent on the fact that it effectively what it does is it stores a list of all the moves you made. So if you think about like a chess game where they have that notation where, you know, pawn moves forward 2 spaces, the enemy, and they have that certain notation they use. That's effectively how we store our game data. We map all the moves that players make and make a list of that, and then when people reload that game, it replays it so that the game state is represented exactly as it was. We do this over other possible methods because there's way too much granularity, especially with regards to things like trigger creation. So there's not a simple way we can simply just store the actual state and bring it back because there's all kinds of programmatic objects that are virtually impossible to track down. And the order of those triggers matters heavily because if you change the order of when the triggers are created, it will create a very different cascading series of events. So this is actually the best way to store the player data that we've come up with. But the problem is that what happens when the game data changes, right? So if we change the rules for something later down the road, such as giving a monster more health or changing how an ability works, well, when it goes to replay that log, it's going to create a desync, and that desync will basically make that game state completely unplayable, right? If you imagine playing through a chess game and you change the rule for how a piece works, and now you try to replay that game, it will be nonsensical. and so the game won't be able to load. And so right now our only solution is that when we do a DLC update or change the game definitions, we simply um, basically eradicate that save and put you back at the camp. And normally, if we had a campaign level, we would still store your progress. So things like your actual earned progress, like what you've completed, how many levels you've done so far, would all be tracked. But right now, because those are all stored as a single node, that progress is lost, and so that can be a really bad experience if you complete half a campaign and spend a half hour and come back and now you've lost all your progress. Not very great. We also got a lot of player feedback from players on those campaigns stating that while they really liked the build up of the characters, it wasn't particularly fun to have to replay the opening sequence over and over again. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just restore back to the last campfire I made it to as a save point? And we concur. So that's something we want to look at doing down here. We've got look into how our player data storage works, and we want to see if we can figure out some better ways to make this campaign experience better for players. So ability to restore a game save to the last time they rested at a campfire. So treat campfires as save points. The ability to choose to restart the entire campaign world, but with the currently generated world. And we'll talk more about what that means. And then the ability to leave and resume a campaign in progress. So that's the other thing. Imagine you were halfway into a campaign, but then your buddy says, I want to play a multiplayer game. Well, right now you can't just drop and play it because it'll, again, as I said earlier, lose all that data. So we need a way to leave and come back without it affecting progress. That should be a sort of a no-brainer piece. So these are all various things that we want to get working before we attempt to do another client update, because this will make it so much more smooth going in the future when we want to make additions of content. It won't break the player's experience. It'll make it nice and easy to get new levels, and so you can kind of see where we're going with this. So all that being said, I haven't quite decided yet where I want to begin to start with this. Maybe a good place to be would be to sort of show you guys, and I'm just trying to get my own brain juices working here as well to figure out where I should begin this. This is probably one of the hardest parts of developing something, right? Like I said, I always start with the high-level design discussion of sort of the goals I want to achieve, but then the hardest part really is the concrete starting point. I gotta say that's probably the biggest challenge with making anything is okay. I've got this great, awesome idea, and I wanna make progress toward it. Where do I begin? Where do I get started? That's typically the place that um, when many people come up with these awesome ideas and then don't follow through in creating them, that's the reason why. It's failure to find how to begin, how to start. Um, so my advice to that is you start somewhere. You got to just sort of make a decision on where to start. And sometimes it involves a little bit of exploration, but when you've gotten really familiar with your game and your design process, you'll start to kind of have an in tune and almost like I said, you wait for the instinctual calling within yourself to figure out where you can make progress. And typically, what I look for are low-hanging fruits. But in this particular case, since I have not touched a lot of these systems in some time, right? I designed the player data storage, probably a year ago, so I'm not familiar with how that code works anymore. I'm gonna need to get re-familiar with it to understand how I could even begin to attempt fixing and adding these additional points in there. I know a little bit of how it works off of memory, but until I dive in there and sort of relook at what I did, I won't know exactly what needs to happen. Likewise, with these prophecy maps, I need to refamiliarize myself with those systems and how they work. I mentioned I know what the problem is with regards to why it didn't surface the new levels is because of how it was storing things. So I think what I'm going to do is kind of just maybe dig into it a little bit more and talk out loud to myself. And as I'm explaining to myself, it'll hopefully explain to you where I'm going with this. So this is our prophecy map table in the definitions. Oh, by the way, I should always mention this for anybody new watching. We developed this in tandem with the game itself. We developed this tool called the D20 Definitions Editor that is responsible for controlling everything content-wise within the game. So new levels, maps, the characters themselves, particle effects, the rules of the game, everything. And we use this tool so that we can deliver dynamic content without the need for code changes. And that allows us to rapidly expand the game, delivering an ever-changing world without creating overhead for the players and ourselves. So this particular table is responsible for creating the the various maps. And I'm trying to remember how these things worked here. And I used to have one that had more of a visual thing on there. And you can see here, there's all kinds of different designs here where I created these. So I said this tree structure was sort of an experiment we were trying out with having branching paths and using each of these to represent a level node and so forth. And I talked about how we're planning to scrap this idea because we felt it was too similar in appearance and functionality to how Slay the Spire currently works, and we want to make sure that our game is differentiated. We don't want to have direct comparables to other game products out there. We want to stand out as original. So we started this experiment as a way to, again, give ourselves a starting point with seeing how it might work. But we think we've got some better ideas for how to design these structures. However, that being said, there are very useful things in here that I can sort of talk through with how these systems are being created. Yeah, this is interesting how these branches are doing that now. That's weird. I don't know when that bug got introduced with the crossing paths. Um, all right, so let's find our, there we go. So here's our current campaign map, okay? And what's important to note is how this is being actually created, where these layouts are coming from, how they're being generated, so that we can understand how we're going to populate new and better maps. So kind of one cool thing that already is happening here is the idea that this screen is something that's interesting because it supports various multiple layouts. We obviously support portrait, landscape. Landscape left and right are the same in this case. But not only that, we also support different changing aspect ratios. So see how when I condense that to 4:3, how it has a way to handle scaling. So this would be like if you're playing on an iPad, and even in portrait mode there, you can see how these pieces change. So this is kind of a cool thing that we can do. I'm not sure why I didn't re-render it there. Should have. Let's change it to that. Oh, look at that. There, it's bigger now. Okay. So that's kind of a cool thing. So these things are already designed for multi-screen layout. The buttons are obviously adapting and so forth. Okay. Now over here, what we have is a mechanism. This is basically a list that allows us to create nodes and then map them to particular levels. So this is sort of the building blocks of creating a campaign, of creating a way of surfacing new content to players. Basically, getting new content players, it comes down to the following. You need to provide a UI of some kind and a mechanism that lets them choose the level they want to play, and you need to have a way to map whatever that UI is back to your actual content. So in our case, let's jump around some more to talk through this. I'm very jumpy in these things, but you know what, so be it. All right, so like here's an example of a campaign. You see these dungeons 1 through 25 is an example of a campaign I created recently. And these are a series of levels. So you can see here I actually have my spawn point for the character, some monsters I fight, and as I complete this, I go to the next room, and I'll be over here, and here's another level, right? So this entire chain of events is all daisy chained together right now via these little identifiers, pointers here that point to the next level. And so this entire campaign can be summarized into a single node right now, where we can play through and complete those campaigns. And that's how we're connecting and mapping the levels. So if I go back to my prophecy map here, and I look at this one here, you can see here where there's that dungeon 1. That's the very first level in the campaign. So what I did was I told it I wanted to have this guy. Let's see if I can move this over for you guys. Hopefully you can see it now. I've got the node asset name. So this is simply telling me what kind of icon I want here. Now this is really cool. Watch this if I save that. Oh, look at that. I can change the asset. So that's one key attribute of being able to customize this thing here. I can change the asset type I want. So now it's got a whole different button than that 3. I can change the type of level, and I believe right now that if I recall from memory, this corresponds to the type of rules or logic it's going to use to actually populate that level. This is the actual map over here that it points to. So this drop down corresponds to my map table. This corresponds to the type of rules it will use. And then you can give it a description and a node description here. And then I think nodes above actually corresponds to the logical sequencing. So if I wanted to create a dependency chain where you have to complete these in order, if If I recall, I believe that's how this works. Let's see, if I say nodes above, if I say 2, let's see what happens if I try this. Aha, look at that. So now you see after I save this to nodes above 2, now I should have to complete number 1 before I can beat number 2. That's what this has done here. Creates a dependency chain there. So this is the first level in the sequence, is the second level. So I can create sort of a dependency on these levels. Now that's an important data point because this will actually be a useful piece of information with storing player data going forward. Because we're going to be talking a lot about not only the creation of these maps today, but also how this relates to player data and how to effectively store player data. And if you're familiar with my past streams, you know that data is a very sensitive subject because when you're talking about a game with lots of users, data is actually a real measurable cost for a small company, even large companies. And this is one of the reasons why games like Hearthstone support only a limited number of custom decks. Like, hey, this should be easy. Why can't I make 50 decks in Hearthstone if I want to? And the answer is data. Even if it's only a handful of kilobytes, when you multiply that by a million users a day, that traffic that has to be synchronized between all those devices adds up to considerable amounts of costs. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per day, potentially, for depending on the number of users. So finding a way to save your player data in as minimal a file footprint as possible is important, not both for the developer because of the cost involved in transferring data, and also for the player because it costs them data too. Believe it or not, when you're having to synchronize data back and forth each time you open the game, especially if you're roaming and you have data charges on your phone, you want that footprint as small as possible so that it's not costing you an arm or a leg. So these are all resources that we have to manage and optimize as developers to ensure the best possible experience and outcome for everyone. Okay, so let's go back at this again here, and you can see here how I can also control like what this says. So right now, if I click that, I think that obviously reflects the prompt. If I were to take and say Lee's Quest, hi, I'm just going to save it just to show you that this updates. So now you can see how it says the new header prompt. And when I play mission, this won't work within the editor yet. I haven't got this. This is more for just testing the layout. This would play the mission. And so that's how this works. Now, theoretically, when I had added these new nodes, my expectation was that this would have actually updated the player campaign map to show the new 3 and 4 nodes. And the reason it didn't was because in the player data itself, we were storing the entire prophecy map definition, including the nodes completed and so forth. And that was because I was assuming that we would have to deal with a situation like this. Let's look at a procedural prophecy. Okay, so here's a procedural prophecy. Imagine if every time you came into the app, your map changed, right? That would be very bad because if you were working and halfway completed this thing, you would not want to have it respawn or regenerate the map. So the only way to prevent that is to store this data. You store the actual structure, what the nodes are, and you put that in the player data so that when they return, everything looks like the same world structure. Well, the bad news was that when I was doing that for the sort of static campaigns here, that it was also storing this. And so my original campaign had 2 levels, and therefore when players came back to it, it showed those 2 levels, and it didn't update the map to show the new content I had added. So that's one of the distinctions in our to-do list here is don't store prophecy map definitions unless it is a procedural campaign. And then I like this pagination idea because we have the choice of having additional campaigns and they may all function differently. If we were going to have a procedurally world generated, we would absolutely need to store that. But we don't want to store it if we're going to have static campaigns. And as I mentioned before, another thing sort of on top of that problem is this is probably not the best way to store campaigns in general. So like I said, this number 3 here starts Lee's Quest. Well, this campaign here that is represented by 1 node represents 25 levels and an hour of gameplay. That's not very good. You see the problem here. That's a very bad distribution of nodes to level because that's just too much content for such a small area. Wouldn't it be better if I could have a entire map that would represent that campaign and show all the levels connected so you can kind of see the spectrum of what that dungeon looks like. So that's one of the ideas we'll be exploring. Okay, so let's look at how these actually where do these maps come from? That's the next great question. So there's really two types. You can see here, we're going to give a little more information. There's this node layout thing. Oh, look at that. And I've got node layout 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's this procedural one. Okay. The procedural one is generated based on an algorithm of how you construct the nodes. And so you can kind of make it indefinite um, based on this sort of formula, which you see at the top here. When you switch to procedural, you've got these different things. I can say, I want to have 40 levels in my, and look at that. Now there's 40 of them. And see how I just magically added new levels. I want to have, you know, 15 tiers of levels, and now it's got 15 rows. And at a certain point, it's going to become almost incomprehensible because these things will barely fit. Like I say, if I have 20, let's see how much we can push this. That's pushing it right there. So you can kind of see things like that. If I had 60 nodes now, look at this gets almost like incomprehensible. And I want to have a minimum of 4 per tier. It looks really ugly and nonsensical. Too much overwhelmingness to players. But that's kind of cool. What's neat about this is how rapidly it creates a structure for you. So what we're aiming to do is leverage a system kind of like this ultimately for creating dungeons. Although I would personally like a little bit more handcrafted elements to it because placement and how these structures will work will differ going forward. So um, it's tricky. In my head right now, what I'm trying to explain is I've got these big picture visions in my head for how I want this to ultimately work. And there's a part of me that gets excited, but also a part that gets distracted by the grandeur and the impossibility. Like, as I start to think about what I want and envision it, it's creating this Mount Everest in my head. And the mountain I have to climb grows out of the earth, literally, as I'm envisioning it. And what's bad about that is I need a concrete place to start to make progress. And if I can't find an anchor point from which to begin the development, then this entire day will turn into a ballooning, expansive work and zero progress. And it's very disheartening. You don't ever want to trap yourself in that place because it will make it seem like you will never finish development of the game. You want to have a vision of where you want to be, but you need to also concrete it into a reality that can be attained so that we can get some measurable amount of work done today. Okay. These other maps, the one I showed you here, so these are actually based on layouts. These layouts correspond to actual visual layouts I've created. So we're going to take a look at those. These are stored in my Dynamics FLA. And so I use Adobe Animate, formerly known as Flash, to create the vector assets and layouts necessary for the game because of the immensely awesome and easy to use visual layout. Most programmers are purely left brain, rational thinkers that do everything in their head via math and placement. And artists are almost always right brain creative. They need visual layouts and they do everything based on placement and design. I am right in the middle of those two. I depend on both. So I need visual layouts to help me comprehend how to work, but I also use that to create the maths involved in making those dynamic layouts work. So these are all various screens for things in the game. I'm looking for the map layouts. Okay, here they are. So these are the different map layouts. I'm trying to think about what these were here. This represents the actual UI for the map that shows the buttons and the placements. And you can see there's two layouts, one for portrait, one for landscape, which we showed earlier. And then there's the actual map layouts themselves, which are these guys here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and guess based off of what I just saw that this must be layout 3. Let's take a look. And look at that, it is. Okay. Now what's important about these maps here is really all that's happening is that I'm mapping an X and a Y for the node placement. Ultimately, it would be beneficial for me to be able to simply create the layouts dynamically within here. And that's where we're going to go at some point in the future. Because it'd be great to just like say, I have an asset, I want to drag it onto this thing here, place it, and then it sort of stores that data directly within the campaign map. That would be awesome. But that's a lot of tool work that I don't have time to make right now. So in the interim, the easy solution was why not just take and do that here because I can already move these around really easily and place stuff, and then just do the mapping part here. And so that's what this represents is a um, a map layout where I can drag and drop assets to show the placement where I want these things to go, and then um, I can use my tool here to map these to particular assets. So really what's important here is not even these actual visual things, but really what's being anchored to them. And then there's a collection of assets that get rendered and rastered. The icons, I believe there's a cluster of them sitting somewhere over here. Where are they? Where are those things? Here they are. These are all the various icon types that can be rastered right now. Those just all sort of sit there. And so it creates those and adds them to the texture atlas, and I can just go ahead and place them. And so when I go to map things, I simply tell it which node ID I want to use. So I can define any number of nodes or placement IDs based off of this description here, and then give it a layout. And you saw one of the cool things that happened was when I rotate the map, all the nodes also rotated face so that the map could be viewed from both portrait and landscape. So like see right now the number 1s and 3s, these are all oriented top, and when I switch it to the landscape right, oh look at that, they all magically fit. So this is good for testing that. So obviously one of the key elements is use square assets that you know will rotate consistently so that you'll have the same map layout, but it'll read in both orientations. It's kind of a cool design trick. Okay, so let's give an example. So I don't have you noticed in my layout that there was actually a fifth node here that I could place if I wanted to. So the way I would do that here is I would go put a new thing here. I would give it an ID number. Okay, this ID number will be important because that's how player data currently tracks it, I believe. I hit, let's say, node 5, and sorry, I can't read what this says. This is the asset name. So this is the actual name of the asset that I want to give it. So in this case, I could say 5 or give it an icon. And if I were to hit save now, it just appears. And it appears in that exact location I had placed it over here. Okay. So let's talk through this because right now with this system, we have a very easy means for which to add new content. If I want to make new content, this entire asset file can be updated dynamically. There's no code involved here. It's just named assets. So if I wanted to create a 6 node here, actually I have node 6s right here already. That's defined as node 6. But let's say we want to create some other ones. I want to be able to create, and I wanted to change how the layout looked. Let's do this with a new. I'm going to close this now because I don't want to change this one just yet. I want to create a new layout that we can use for our talking points here. This is just good exercise, giving me refamiliarizing myself with my own tools and methodologies. So it's giving me more kind of what I'm doing right now is I'm building the mental model in my head for how these systems work. And by building that mental model, I'm getting all the synapses in my brain are connecting together to figure out how we're going to be able to expand and take this to the next step we need it to go, the next direction. Right? Because it's all about programmers need to build that mental model to be able to build. So we're just slowly letting it soak in here as I begin the work. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new layout and demonstrate how we can add these various assets. So let's go to my layouts. Where do I have these things stored actually? Do I have them anywhere in particular? No. See, this is really sloppy. This file is getting absorbently out of control. Needs to be reeled in and organized better at some point. Okay, so let's go ahead and take and copy this. And I'm going to paste it. Is that how I do it? No, I guess that's not how I do it. I go duplicate. Okay, there we go. I'm going to call this node map 5. Okay. And we're just going to go ahead and drop it on here. All right, so we need to give it a name. And we're going to call it layout 5 for now. Boom. Okay. So that's been done. All right, and now inside layout 5. Oh, incidentally, this is the cool part about how this works. So this is contained within a clip called node layouts, right? And so the way the tool works is when it loads in the file, the asset file, it knows to look for node layouts in the node layout clip. And you see here how it creates this drop down. So when we put the new asset file in there, we're going to have a new layout 5 that we can then work off of. Pretty cool, right? All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to just create a new structure. Let's just, for fun, we're going to just go ahead and, I don't know, I'm just going to arrange these differently just to show how it's working, right? So we can get a sense of how we can connect these things together. And then we're going to have some fun with this in a little bit. All right, so let's get rid of that for now. It'll probably be important to have something like that later on, but I'm just going to go ahead and let's make this node 6. Probably be helpful to have these numbered in some way if I was going to use numbers to have the number be dynamic. Right now it's a fixed asset, but again, we're just trying to showcase how the different layouts will work so we can create different structures of stuff. And let's just, oops, I copied that right. Control, there we go. Okay, so node 8. All right, so again, this is just this really stupid structure, but I'm demonstrating again how do we create a ever expanding world that can update without code, and this is how we're doing it. All right, so I've got eight potential node slots where I can put stuff in there right now. I'm going to save this. I'm going to publish this. Okay. And so now I need to actually put that into my definitions folder because right now this has not been republished. And rather than republishing the code, we're going to just do a dynamic code drop or a dynamic drop. So what I need to do is let's open a new Finder window. I need to go to my applications. And you go to my definitions editor. Let's see what's in here. Contents, resources. Okay, so there's the existing dynamics right in. There should be one in here. Where am I? Am I blind? Am I not seeing it? Where? I'm confused. Why I'm not seeing that file in here? Hmm. Well, that's interesting. How is that possible? This absolutely has to have a dynamics file in there. Where is it? I am. Ross is confused. Something is not correct here. This must not be the right. This can't be right. Definitions editor. Oh, okay. I understand what's happening. No, okay. I don't actually have it stored here. I have this stored inside of here. I changed the structure. I'm like, what's going on? Okay, here we go. This is the one we want. There it is. Okay, I must say, I'm like, that's an older version of it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go back into the apps, and we're going to simply drop in the new asset file with that additional layout created and replace. Now, when I restart the definitions editor, it's going to load in that file again, and this time it should detect that we have a new layout, layout 5. So let's go to prophecy maps again. You know what? And just for fun, maybe I'll use this map here. So let's change this. So there it is, layout 5, and you see it cleared it because it's a whole new structure. And now I can go in here and say I want to have something mapped to node ID, and I again type the ID. So let's say we're going to correspond to like this one. This was node 8, so we'll put something up there. Node 8. I want to have that be I'll make it be a skull. I can just this is just the asset because all we're looking at is those anchor points, and then hit save. And there it is. Look at that. So now I've got a new level node anchor there, and I can create any number of these things. So let's say 7. I can make this be a snake. Save. There it is. And so those correspond directly to those anchor points. So it's a little complex and difficult to visualize that because because the assets can be different, it may not shift and rotate accordingly to how I want. But what this is allowing me to do is create um, in a little bit of a complex way the visual layout for how I want to actually show the content to players inside this dynamic layout, and then be able to map it to programmatic definitions inside of here using this tool, which has reference to all the various levels I want to map it. Like let's say I wanted level, the snake level to be, I don't know, scenario. Okay, so now it's going to pick a campaign. I want this to be this boss fight level as an example. Okay, so now that snake will be mapped to that particular map. Okay, so that's how one of the ways in which we can design this campaign to be expansive like that. And again, ultimately, this is a bad form because we're having to create layouts sort of disjunctively, which would be ideal to create these layouts inside of a singular location like this. But for now, this solves the dev work of having to be able to drag and drop assets, which involves a lot of additional programming to be able to create a similar type of structure here. And then I can also mention if we want to create dependency, like let's say you have to beat snake level before this one, what I can do is say nodes above is 8 and save that. And now this is the starting point. At least that's why it's pulsing because this is the first level in the chain. I'm curious what happens if I create something before that. What if I hit 6? And let's make that a interesting. So they're both possibly branching to this. Now if I said this one was branching at I want you to branch to node 7 instead. It should go dink, dink, dink. Let's see if that works the way I want it to. It did. Look at that. I'm not sure why they're both pulsing like that. I feel like they should. One should be a starting point. One should not. I'm not really quite sure why it works the way it's doing. Like why they're both pulsing. Um, is there something else in here? Node label, node description. I feel like there's something else that should be determining this. Oh, oh, okay, I see. I think what I have to do is do 7, 8, maybe? Is that how this works? Oh, weird. That created a chain. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure why it pulses both of them. So see, there you go. I'm already not familiar with what's happening here, but clearly I built this system here with some kind of foresight into having something happen because clearly it's drawing a line there. So that's already somewhat useful. Um, okay. So there's that. So that's one piece of the puzzle we have to figure out. All right. The other big piece of the puzzle is this player data part, and that's where I need to really look into how the player data storage is currently working to better understand how exactly we're going to be able to do these magical things we want to do to support this expansion. So let's take a look at player data, shall we? Player data, and there's something called player data store. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. Okay, so player data store. Oh boy, look at this. There's all kinds of notes in here. We something about we don't want player data to be stored with hacks. I got all kinds of notes and cryptic things I said in here. Anyway, so this is the static class that basically is responsible for storing the player data. And what it does is it stores it as a um, something called a shared object, and it stores that in your application storage directory, wherever that would be on your PC or your phone, and basically just keeps records of data, and it's encoded with whatever proprietary binary encoder that Flash or ActionScript currently uses. But when it comes down to it, it still translates it back into readable encoded text structures that I use to recreate game objects. And so things it's responsible for saving, we need to be able to save things like the player's custom decks they've created. We need to be able to store, clearly this is saving the prophecy map. This is the part we talked about is what's causing our current problem with why we're not seeing new levels. It also stores the tips you've completed. So if you've already seen like a tool tip and you've acknowledged that you've learned that particular tip, it stores that for you. It can reset the tips if you want to not complete them. Looks like it stores completion of individual levels, so we're going to have to look at that one. That's probably very important to what we're going to be doing. The save data is what actually flushes out the data and restores it. Eventually, this will also be responsible for synchronizing it with the multi-user servers. So right now, all the player data is stored locally only, but going forward for cross-platform, we want to have that cloud saved. So my server will actually store that at some point in the future and then synchronize between devices so you can pick up and play where you left off. All right, let's see. This merge custom decks is responsible for um, taking the player decks and creating IDs for them so that they can exist within the deck list that players can choose from. There's these game configuration strings. So what this does is it extracts your currently selected team, I believe, and converts it into a player config. so that you have the necessary bits of information from which to join a multiplayer game with your deck and hero configuration, or so that you can play a adventure campaign where you can choose your team in advance and then go into a campaign. That's the two things I believe it does. Okay, so let's see what other things are in here. Reset tips deck, delete decks, save decks. Okay, those are all operations for modifying decks. There's something with your password, usernames stored in there, so you can store your password and have to type it in each time. This sets the tutorial as save data. Interesting. I believe when you create a new player data, you need to, yeah, we want to start a player off already having launched into a tutorial so they can learn how to play. So the first thing you see when you come into the game is gameplay, not like a menu system. And this sort of configures that for you. It detects if there's records for you or not, all kinds of cool things. All right, and then let's look at the player data class itself. So this is the actual thing that gets converted, and you can see more specifically in here types of things that we have being stored. And then we can sort of, from here, hopefully identify what the problems are and what the opportunities are. Okay, so at the top here, there's a tutorial version, and this is quite interesting. I believe I had stored this with the idea being that if I wanted to change the tutorial versioning in the future for testing purposes and I wanted to have players experience new tutorials, I could update tutorial version, and as a result of doing that, allow them to be resurfaced as tutorial on their next playthrough. I'm pretty sure that's what that does. The deck ID start is responsible for telling it what numerical IDs to give decks, and I picked the high number of 1,000, started at 1,001, so that it wouldn't interfere with any hard-coded decks in my definitions editor. Max decks is how many decks the local player data can store. We're at 18 right now, and the maximum deck size is, oh, so interesting. I can actually configure how many cards can be in the deck from here. It looks like that's what this determines, so I can control all these pieces. Okay, so we've got an array of decks. This is the actual decks that players store. I'm assuming this stores an array of deck definition data. The max decks is set as an integer here. I'm not sure why it needs a separate integer from this, but I'm sure there's a reason. Okay, setup, def test settings. I believe this stores all of your, this is probably specifically for debug mode for me. I have an entire section of data that stores what I'm assuming are all of your all of the control flags for debug testing. Options, test options. These are things like whether you want to show FPS or you want sticky light bars. Okay, so here's prophecy map. So this is where it's storing your campaign data. All right. So one problem off the bat we can see here is that it has one object. All right. So whereas other types of things had arrays of objects, like we had arrays of decks, this has one singular definition being stored. So that off the bat is a red flag or problem with our notion of moving toward a paginated campaign system. So we wanted to eventually make it where players could flip through pages of these campaign maps. We would need a way to store multitudes of prophecy maps and or find a way to figure out how to store these different things. So that's going to be something we're definitely be looking at. Card sort data. So this is the preferences in the player with how they want to have their cards organized anytime that they would be surfaced cards in a list. So kind of a cool thing if you like having your cards shown alphabetically or sorted highest to lowest mana cost or whatever. The player data stores that so that throughout the game, anytime you surface cards, whether it be in your collection, your deck building, or your shops, or choosing a card, it always shows the cards according to the preferences you have set in your player data. Okay, save game. So this would actually be the actual game log. So I mentioned that when we save game state, it's saved as a log, a series of commands and interactions that were made by the player and the AI, just like chess notation. And then what happens when the game reloads, the engine replays it exactly to restore it, so everything is perfectly synced with where you left off. And again, save game naturally depends on definitions being exactly the same. So at any point in time in which we change the rules for anything in the game, save game state is compromised and can no longer be relied upon to restore the game where it was. And there are very few workarounds for that. Like I mentioned, because of the way that all the complex triggers work, recreation of a game state in any other way would be very difficult to comprehend and would probably use an absorbent amount of data to be able to even track how to do that. Um, so we use a log system instead. Save version, I believe this simply tells you what client version it was saved at and what DLC version it was saved at, so that when it does its checks at the loading phase, if these are different than the current version that's been updated or patched, it will tell it to fail the game save load so that it doesn't try to load you into a desync game state. All right, so tutorial version corresponds to this static variable here. All right, completed nodes. Okay, so um, this corresponds to the levels you've completed within the prophecy map. So this is effectively here your save state progress in the campaign. So you'll have things like little check marks you get when you complete a campaign level, and that's what this will correspond to, is it'll store those as completed nodes. All right, carryover. All right, so this is very important. The carryover is storing your everything about your actual adventure party. Okay, so when you go to start an adventure in the campaign world with your heroes, the campaign world corresponds to, or the carryover corresponds to all of those measurable statistics that get merged into the game start data. So this includes things like your summoner, your guardians, the cards in your deck, how much life each of those characters has, and so forth. And what's cool about this object is that it does not have the same sync issues as we would expect or as we would incur within the save state, right? Because what it's effectively doing is creating a series of starting data, right? And because it's all starting data, there's much less of an occurrence of a desync because what you're essentially providing is just the basic information necessary to start a game with those starting attributes. So it's actually encoding the IDs of everything you have, and then it's storing the numerical values of what their starting points are. But there's not that same reliance on the programmatic triggers. So we can actually represent that as serialized data that can be represented as a text. I guess I should explain that too. So for anyone who's not programmer, um, here's the key challenges. Game data is stored in a series of objects that are recognized by the program. In order to save things with persistency, the ability to load it back at a later time, you need to be able to write that data out into a format that can be understood by the program. And typically, it has to be written into a form that is in a text format. That's ultimately what it comes down to is we're gonna encode this data back into a text string that the program can then read back in and recreate as game objects. So that process is called serialization and deserialization or whatever. I'm not sure which of the two corresponds to which, but effectively what it means is we have to take our game data, encode it into a string that can be stored as a file, and then at the time of load, retake that string back and convert it back into game objects. That's effectively what this player data object is going to be doing for us. And in fact, you can even see that here. There's a method called data to string. So I'm sort of jumping ahead, but there it is. We're converting data into a string so that everything within the game data can be represented as a text file and then loaded back in. Okay, so that's what's cool about the carryover, though. Completed tips is just the array of the ID. I believe it stores a list of the tip IDs that have been completed, and then completed scenarios. See, I'm a little bit confused as to these two distinctions. I'm not sure. We've got a completed nodes and a completed scenarios. I'm not sure what the difference between these two items is. If one of them even does anything. Let's see if this even does anything. No. So that does nothing. So we can just go ahead and comment this off right away. That this is probably something I put in there thinking I was going to do something with it, but right now this does absolutely nothing. So I can comment it out and I should see no bugs. All right, let's even put a note there. Those are, okay, this doesn't do anything. I'm not sure why it's there. Let's do a search for this and see if it appears anywhere in like a string. Maybe I had commented out where I wanted to do something with it at some point in the future. File search encounter problem. All right, let's refresh this thing again. So now we're going to search the program for any instances where this may have been lingering around. Okay. Let's just see. I'm just curious. Okay. Oh, wait, there it is. Yep. All right. So it doesn't do anything, and it was never referenced. So whatever purpose this may have served, I have no idea because there's no notes for it, and it's just sort of sitting there. So it's just completely useless. We can just get rid of it. Okay. Okay. So I mentioned that the biggest importance right now is the ability to add new levels to the campaign. Okay. So we have um, we have an opportunity here for a low-hanging fruit to give us what we immediately need for the game client. And what we immediately need for the game client is the ability to add additional levels without the player having to delete their save state or their player data in order to see those new levels appearing. And I think that's where we're probably going to start our dev work today. Because at the very least, I can provide some immediate value that allows us to get this client out the door so we can start surfacing new levels. And then we can talk about some of the more fancy things we'd like to do. But that would be, for me, the MVP of work I'd like to get done today, is to at least get it to the place where we can add new levels without the player's um, data, without the player having to reset their data. Okay, so when I add, let's go back to this GDC prophecy here. So if I could add new campaigns and drop those numbers into here using this process we had shown here, where I can just keep adding new numbers and mapping them to new levels, that at a minimum will provide an immense value to our early access players for playing new content. So having gone through all these things and familiarized myself a bit with what's going on in the background, I think that would be a good starting point. And then we can kind of take shape from there and figure out how to expand on some of these other touch points. So looking at my list here, this is sort of item number one. Do not store the prophecy map definition unless it is a procedural campaign. Okay, so that's a modification we can make here. So here's the prophecy map definition. So let's look at this and figure out how it's being used. This is where we need to investigate. Interesting, it's used in lots of places. Look at that. Look at that, huh? Okay, well, let's start in the player data itself. Okay, so it looks like when the player data is converted to a string, which would probably happen whenever it needs to save it, it player data.prophecy map equals prophecy map to string. So this prophecy map has its own way of encoding itself to a string. Okay, so here we go. Now we're getting somewhere into the nitty-gritty of it. Here is a definition for a prophecy map and how it looks structural-wise. Nodes per tier, nodes per tier. These all correspond to those values we saw in the procedural prophecy here. All these fun statistics. So you can see here what it looks like I attempted to do was take all of this interesting fun data and I need to be able to convert that to a string for storage later. So here's all those relevant properties. It looks like these are all clearly just integers, which you can see here. That makes sense to me. The layout is represented as a string. Nodes per tiers, I believe that's nodes per tiers. What does that correspond to? Huh. That one's a little more interesting. I'm not quite sure what nodes per tiers is because it's listed as an array. So I'm not sure how that must be something about, this must be an actual structural representation of it somehow. Let's take a look and see what this is doing. Oh yeah, this does. This has something to do with how it's drawn. It looks like it's only used by procedural layouts because it's only in this method here for drawing procedural layout. And nodes per tiers. Okay. I believe this is the count of how many nodes are listed on each tier after it's generated the actual map. So at some point, yeah, that makes sense to me now. When it generates this, you see how we've got a min and a max node per tier, right? So if we need to be able to save this to recreate it later, what this is actually doing is it's making an array of nodes per tier. So we've got 10 tiers, right? So the first index would be 3, the second would be 6, then 2, then 4, then 2, and so forth. So that's storing the actual number of nodes that are being populated in each tier, so it can recreate this tree structure exactly as the algorithm had generated it. Okay, so that's specifically for saving a procedural map definition that's where that's being used. Okay, so now we know what that is. Okay, and now let's take a look and see how it's storing all this stuff. So to string, interesting. Okay, so then the nodes themselves looks like that's a list. There's an array of nodes, and nodes is also a complex object because each node, as you saw down here, has its own series of definitions. So nodes corresponds to the array list we have created here. Okay, I'm starting to piece this together now. And then nodes themselves have their own series of data listed. Looks like they can also have traits listed, so there's all kinds of properties. And so it looks like what we did here was we created a nested structure where nodes is stored as a nodes array to string. So we convert nodes array to strings. Let's see what this is doing. Okay, so it looks like it creates a comma delimited list of nodes. And it has to convert the node to a string, so let's see what that looks like. Aha! See, we're learning here. So it looks like there's a specific definition for a prophecy node that has all of its corresponding properties, which looks like this. They also have an array, they also have a list, and so this converts all of that to a string as well. Okay, this is making more and more sense to me as I familiarize myself once again with how this thing was built. Okay, so here's where all the nodes are being converted to string. And so this basically creates one giant string of data that represents the entire map structure. Now, what's important to note here is that I believe, because we do want to store players' progress, we want to preserve the levels they have completed. We just don't want to store the map. Okay, so what I'm wondering about is whether or not we have the opportunity here to be able to simply eradicate the storage of the prophecy map and maintain storage of completed nodes, which would effectively allow us, if we assume that for the time being we're going to simply add new campaigns by dropping in new icons here, then we don't have to worry about storing the procedure, but we do want to store the progress. We may be able to simply eliminate storage of the prophecy def and maintain a reference of the completed nodes. Okay, so let's take a look at that and see what we've got going on. Player data. Let me go back to player data here because I want to look at this once again. Prophecy map. This is really the key thing. All right, so there's a save prophecy and this creation of the view. Okay, this here is where I believe the main issue lies. Create the story map view. Okay, so this is inside the camp, and this is inside of. Interesting. I'm trying to figure out how I even did this. Where is it creating this thing? Def prophecy map. Okay. Oh, look at this. We can even see a piece here that says if the node layout is a procedural, then generate a new one. Okay, so here, let's look at this. So if the player data store, if the player does not have a prophecy map defined, it's null, then what's going to happen is it's going to attempt to get one. All right. So in here, aha, see now we're connecting the dots. Where does it determine which of these maps? That was one of my questions I was trying to remember is I've got all these maps here. How did it know that this is the one that we want the game to use? Well, look at this. This tells us right here. So when it goes to create the map view, oh wow, look at this. This is very interesting. Okay, so it's going to determine the prophecy map. So if there is no prophecy map stored in data inside the player data, what's going to happen is it's going to um, figure out what the first prophecy map is. So this is already a definition. So this hard-coded actions.get, we're going to look at that. See what this does. Look, I even have a note for myself. Look at that. I love how I leave these little reminders. Like I knew I was going to come back and have to read this. Here is where we define the prophecy map player experiences. Okay. And what this does. So definitions loader, get definition prophecy map, hurl squirrel prophecy ID. So it looks like it's getting the very first map. There should be a semicolon there. Let's fix that. Okay, and this is a hard-coded ID, which is number 8. Hurl squirrel prophecy ID. That's interesting. 8. Okay, so I'm assuming that corresponds to this. Oh wow. Okay. So that's corresponding to the first prophecy, which is the one that has the hurl squirrel on it, even though the hurl squirrel is a simple single node within this, which is very weird. Okay. All right. Process confusion aside, we've got an answer for how it's doing this. So the game has a hard-coded number that tells it which particular prophecy it wants to be the one to surface to the player. All right? And it's doing that with this static method for hard-coded where I use this class as sort of a bridge to get a particular definition. And so what this does is it gets the prophecy map. What it does, how it does that is that it gets the ID, and then this is going to get it from the particular table. It's going to grab that data row in the actual database, convert it into a prophecy map, and then return that definition back to the requester. Okay, so that's how it's doing this. So what's interesting to note here is we have another opportunity. All right, the opportunity is as follows. Right now, you can see that there is only the chance of ever having one prophecy map surface to the player. And the opportunity we had talked about earlier in our to-do list was, what if we had pagination support? So we have multiple prophecy maps. And why is that important to have a pagination? Well, let's consider something of a problem here. This is great right now. I've got 4 levels. I've got plenty of room to add more. What happens when I have 100 levels, 200 levels? I mean, that may not happen for a while, but at some point there is a limit, a physical limit to the number of little icons I can fit on this screen that will be comprehensible and functional to the player. And when that limit is exceeded, we're going to need a solution, and that's where a pagination could be useful. Pagination could also be useful for helping to categorize things. A lot of players have talked about a desire to have levels that sort of represent, I guess, challenges. Sort of a pitch scenario that says something like, you are in the middle of this battle with an AI. You've got these cards in your hand, and you need to defeat this enemy in 3 moves. And they're sort of like almost like little training exercises, little micro puzzle challenges that can be used to serve for tutorialization, onboarding you to a new skill, sort of brain teasers. Like it's just another form of content. It doesn't really fall into the category of adventure, but it's something that we could surface as additional content. And like the story campaigns, we need a place to surface that. So one potential use case could be, what if there was a one of these screens represented like challenges, and you could have these be like sets. What if you could even have expansions where you could have this? This could be like paid DLC way down the road where you have an entirely new set of like challenges or something like that, where you could buy a whole set of new levels and it would just come as a new map with those 20 levels included, and then it sort of appears in the player's list of possible campaigns they can scroll through, right? So that's an interesting idea. We're looking at ways of which we can inject new content into the game that would make it more expansive and have that be able to go back into the game easily. And as you add more and more content, this becomes more and more complex and harder to surface, right? So I mentioned, you could have 100 levels and populate them all here. Then you could have another page and flip it. What happens when you get to 1,000 levels? I mean, are you flipping through 100 pages? See, that becomes trickier too. So, at some point you need to have other mechanisms to support the scalability of it. One of the things, obviously, we do now in the game with our cards, because we had the same problem with the cards. Um, there's 300, 400 browsable cards in the game right now, and so we have you can certainly browse through the pages, right? But we also have 12 cards per page. So one thing you could do is have, instead of a page that represents the actual campaign map, you could have a page that's populated with cells that represent sort of like a high level description. So what this could be is a pagination that has a node that says, you know, challenge set 1, challenge set 2, story mode 1, story mode 2. Then you could sort of browse through pages of those, click on those icons, and then they would go into a more extensive list, right? So that's another structure we could do. Um, and then eventually, at some point, you need to have the ability to search. So if you get to the point where you're, way in the future, though, that's way future problem where we would need to query the actual levels. So again, I don't know how much this is necessary for this next client update, but I always like to think ahead and to future-proof it because it's good to get those systems in place early. Because one of the great things about the early access is you get this nice hardening phase where you've got like these players that are really committed to the game. They've been awesome with helping me to understand where the problems are, and I can fix those issues so that in the long term, when I go to add content, I know that that code is stable, that it works well, that it can handle anything I throw at it content-wise. So, being as future-proof in the designs of these things as possible is always a great idea. You should always be thinking toward where this is going to go in the future. So there's that. Okay. So anyway, the opportunity I was suggesting was right now, one of the key problems here is that this definition is hard-coded. That's a big problem because I have no way to change that map that's surfaced to players when they are going into. I have no way to change that map for the players without doing a client update or changing the map itself, what's on there. So that's one of the issues. So the opportunity is rather than hard code a particular map, one of the things I could do is hard code a prophecy map list, or hard code this to a pointer that I can change easily. So if I wanted to make this a different map, I could just go into my definitions and change that to a different number map. The list is the best idea because then I could literally create a series of different maps. Like let's say I want to have, there's 5 different prophecy maps I could have the player's surface levels with. Here is the list, and then it can just go ahead and create those layouts and then have a pagination scrolling where you could flip through them and see all the levels. And I could very easily add not just new levels, but entirely new sets of levels that represent different structures. Um, Maybe for a challenge scenario, I wanted to create a structure where players have to beat the challenges in a sequential order, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I do those dependencies like I showed earlier, where you can't beat level 4 until you beat level 3. But on a different prophecy map, maybe they represent just different adventures, and it doesn't matter which order you complete them in which case I could get rid of the dependencies, and then each one of these maps could have different behaviors. Okay, so let's look at the rest of this. So this is interesting. So if the layout is procedural, it goes ahead and generates the procedural, which is interesting. But only if it's a new map. So it's not doing it here. And then it saves the prophecy. So the very first time you go into the game, it's going to store the prophecy and save it, and then that's it. It does not have the opportunity at that point to then generate a new one. And this is why when we went and added those new campaigns, it did not see them because most players already had a prophecy map defined. So they did not have the ability to load the new one. All right. And then here, it goes ahead and it loads the existing prophecy map stored in player data. Okay. All right. And then let's see. The next part of it is it looks like it gets the completed node array from the player data, copies it. All right. And then let's see. What does it do with the completed nodes? So if control test mode is false and the prophecy ID is not equal to the hurl prophecy ID. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, okay. I see. This is a debug option I left in for myself. This debug option allows it to control Not sure exactly what this is doing. If the def prophecy map ID is not equal to this, then get first prophecy map. So how would it get a different prophecy ID? That's interesting. Let's go back into this again. I want to see if I can track down how I did this. Because I know I put a little backdoor for myself to test the procedural prop. Yeah, here it is. This one. That's interesting. It's not even using that. So where the heck did it get that prophecy, procedural prophecy from? I'm very intrigued now. I know it was using this thing somewhere because it clearly was putting it in the game for me. Um, procedural prophecy was 2, 3. Which one was 4? Looks like it was this one. Okay. Interesting. Let's see if we can dig through this again and see if there's any more prophecies sitting in here. I'm trying to figure out how I was able to get that prophecy to load into the game for me. Give me some better ideas about how that's working. Interesting. So I'm at a loss right now to figure out that one's I did not do a very good job annotating that for myself. But clearly, I had somehow constructed a way to create procedural prophecies for when test mode was false. So we'll see if we can figure out how that worked. Maybe I can kind of scroll through here and figure out really quick. Oh boy, story map screen, interesting. Okay, let's take a look at this. Aha, new button. Let's believe what was causing this. Let's see this new button here. I'm gonna see this new button. This is what allowed me to generate new prophecies, as I recall. We're gonna look at the story mode. That's it. New map. Aha! There's where that. This is where I should have been. Here is where I define prophecy map player experience as interesting. Okay, so this new button was allowing me to generate new prophecy maps within the editor. This should have been pointing to that hard-coded piece. Let's do that so I can help myself for the future. I knew that thing was hiding there somewhere. Hard-coded actions dot this. Okay. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take a brief break. I will return momentarily. I will be back with you guys in just a second here. Let's see, I'll put up this screen here for just a moment, time being. Okay, I will be back in just one moment. All right, hello everyone. I am back. And we are in the process of investigating our current data models for how we're storing the campaign maps and surfacing new content to players within Summoner's Fate. And I've almost finished reviewing all the existing code, and I'm looking for opportunities for where we can start making changes to move towards our goals. Okay. So we tracked down where that procedural prophecy was created. So it looks like what I had done here was I had put in a way for debug mode to be able to test the procedural processes within the current client. And it looks like one of the things I was doing here was that if control test mode is false, which means it's not in debug mode, and the prophecy ID was not equal to the one that players were getting, to then create the prophecy map as the first one, and then reset the completed nodes IDs. It's not actually saving it in the player data, it's just changing it back. And then if the story level selector equals to null, story level selector equals new story level selector prophecy map. Okay, this is all interesting stuff. So this is where it actually goes and creates the prophecy map. Okay, so this particular class here is a view module. This takes the prophecy map definition and the completed nodes as parameters. Let's see if we can learn about how this is creating everything. Make layout. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and guess this is what's actually doing the work. And we're back to this class again. Okay, let's see if we can figure out where this completed nodes thing comes into play, because that'll give us a sense of how it's actually tracking progression. Node map view. Wow, this thing really goes on a long journey of nested classes, making it very hard to track. So it looks like this guy here is really just responsible for the layout. I'm not, yeah, this is just placing the buttons. The node map itself is what actually is the actual layout. So now we're going to dive into this. So story screen layout was this entire window with the two buttons, and then this is just one piece of it. And then this block with the actual nodes is the key piece of data. That's the node map view. Okay. So interesting. All right, so it looks like based off of the completed nodes, it determines what node IDs are playable here. Get playable nodes. All right, this is interesting. Let's go dive into this. If completed node IDs.length is equal to 0, nodes below. Interesting. There's this nodes below. Now that was interesting because we had an issue before when we were playing around with this guy here, remember? And we see like clearly these are both pulsing, which would indicate to me that they are both playable. But why is this guy pulsing when he's got a dependency to go here on this guy? So I notice I have a nodes above. So how does it determine the nodes below, I guess is the question. I'm going to attempt to figure that out. Also, why do I not have a nice copy button in here? I thought I did. There's no copy button for these nodes. Interesting. Okay. That looks like that actually just copy it, which is strange. Let's change this to 5. Let's make this guy be 6. Yeah, that's so weird. And why is just that last one not playable? That's so strange to me. You know what? Let's make another interesting thing. Let's say that what happens if I change him to nodes above 5? I'm just trying to figure out how these nodes above thing works. Now look, now they're all playable. It's a big loop. Let's undo that. Yeah, that's weird. Huh. Everything but the last one's playable. What happens if I remove this guy? Oh, I did not like that. Interesting. Possibly because this is no longer legal. Yeah, interesting. It looks like everything but the last one was playable. Very, very strange. So something about there's clearly a nodes above and a nodes below consideration happening. I'm not certain as to how nodes below is calculated, but clearly that has something to do with why those be pulsing or not pulsing. Because it looks like what this thing's doing is it's passing in the completed node IDs, and based off of those determinations, okay, so let's see, completed node IDs dot length. So interesting. Completed node IDs dot length equals to 0. For I equals 0, I is less than nodes dot length. Node equals, oh, interesting. This is also intriguing to me here because I'm looking at this line of code here, and to me this makes little sense. And why does it make little sense? Well, it makes sense because it makes no little sense because I'm asking myself the question right now. This clearly is storing a list of particular node IDs, but then when it goes to reference that, oh wait, no, maybe this is correct. Never mind. Take this back. This is okay. Last completed node equals completed node IDs. Yeah, I'm still struggling to figure out why. Basically, my question is, why does completed node IDs need to store an array list and not just the last one completed if it's using a structure like this? But I'm assuming that allow replayability of starting and completed nodes if not procedural map. Oh, okay. So it looks like there's two different rule sets. The procedural map does not allow you to backtrack or replay a level you've already beaten, which makes sense because that's supposed to be a continuous experience. Whereas with the other nodes, it's allowing the replayability of it. So if you want to replay the tutorial, you can. So that's also interesting. There's a distinction between how these two maps function, which I think is interesting. Um, so I'm thinking about another one of our problems we have with regards to design is I have this idea about being able to represent my longer campaigns. We mentioned how I've got that one campaign right now that's represented here. This campaign is 25 levels long. I would like to see a situation where instead of being represented as a single bubble, it's represented as a chain of 25 rooms, and you could therefore save your progress at any particular room so that if you know the you need to leave the campaign and come back, it'll show you just how much of the campaign you've completed visually. And at some point later in the future, we could then take that visual representation and have that be surfaced within the game itself, so you can kind of almost like as you're exploring a dungeon, see the layout of the map, and at some point in the future have the ability to go back, traverse backwards, or go to different directions and different rooms, etc. That's all getting ahead of ourselves, but that's one of the things we need to figure out too. So yeah, allow replayability of starting and completing nodes if not the procedural map. Okay. Okay, so it looks like this says the last completed node, nodes above dot length. So this is probably making it. This is what this is probably doing is a check to see if there's no dependencies within a certain level. Um, this is basically validating it so that you can't play levels that are illegal to play because of you haven't beaten the dependent level first. I guess you could do something similar, like kind of we were working on here. We've got this little chain, but what if we did another chain that was like this? Let's say we had 5, and that was a cave. Oops, where's this? Why didn't it show up? Do I have to map it to something? Maybe I do. Why is this thing not mapped? That doesn't make any sense. Cave node level ID. Oh, I guess I have to map it to something first. Okay, there we go. So there's a cave, and let's say we have another one that was level 4. Save that. Okay, so what if we want to do something like this? It says like that. So now you could have two separate chains. You can almost have like this is one mini campaign, like you have to beat this level before you can play this level and so forth, and you have to beat this one before you can play these two. I guess I could create something like that with that structure. Okay, interesting. Okay, Well, that is that. That is that. All right. So let's talk about the low-hanging fruit again. I think I've got enough of an understanding now where I'm starting to see how this comes together and where our potential problems are. And what I'm seeing here is our literal statement in our code was something of the effect of do not store prophecy map definition unless it is a procedural campaign. Okay. Another way of saying that is do not load the player's prophecy map if it is a procedural campaign. Okay. So I'm going to put in a line of code here that I believe would immediately fix the bug we had experienced with regards to adding new static campaign levels. So this is the low-hanging fruit first task. If depth prophecy map dot no layout, I don't like how I have this thing as a string here. This should really be like hard-coded somewhere. So I think one of the things we're going to do is fix that problem. Trying to think where I should store that. All right, let's make a static variable in here and just say public static constant. And the reason I do this is because then I can reference where it's used. Just giving it a place right now. Procedural layout string equals. Because when you use a pointer, right now the problem is like in order to find the string, I have to search for where it's used. Let's give an example of how this is annoying to do it this way. And like, there's 8 matches for this goofy string. I have to search for it. I can't just easily find it. Whereas if it's a hard-coded type, I can quickly find it. So we're going to replace that, and then I'll show you why that's important to do. Okay, so let's go back to this thing and say this. So clearly this has functional meaning for the code, so that's why we're going to store that. Okay. And we'll go back to our code here, and we're going to say if this is equal to def prophecy map dot that, which is the same meaning, but now it's hard typed. Okay. And we're going to do something. All right, so here's why this is cool. Oops, I got to put that little bit in there still. With it being a hard type, now I can right-click on it in the code and say open call hierarchy, and it'll show me everything where it's used. Right? I don't have to do that goofy search, and I can refactor it and change it and manipulate it directly without risk of that string. Never use loose strings like that. They should always be hard-coded type. I should have never had it like that. So we are going to go back and fix all those loose places like that because this is really helpful for figuring out where things are used. So let's go into all these things and replace that silly thing with this proper definition of that. Oops. Dot procedural layout. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and replace all those goofy things with that. Okay. Another one. Okay. Ugh, God, I used it all over the place. That's just terrible, Ross. What were you thinking? Problem is, if I change that name anywhere, all these would break. Now I can change it one place and they'll all work consistently. So, never good to use it like that. Ugh, so bad. Okay. Let's do that search one more time. I believe I eradicated all of them. Yep, except the one there. Good. Okay. All right. So, if def prophecy map dot no layout equal to def prophecy map procedural layout, then we're going to say as follows. Sorry, if it's not a procedural, this is the key. Def prophecy map equals this. And I guess we could, not sure if it's necessary to save it again or whatnot. I feel like we don't even need to do that. Okay, let's see here. Save prophecy. Okay. Well, this piece alone should fix it, but I still feel like there would be value in not storing it at all to begin with. Anyway, so let's talk about what we just did. So if the prophecy map node layout is not a procedural layout, okay, we're going to reset this to use the hard-coded map, okay? So let's talk about why that fixes the bug we had with surfacing new levels earlier. Previously, what happened was we had stored the mission and it saved the data. So imagine that levels 3 and 4 are gone, okay? So the very first time you go to play the game, it stores the map like this, all right? And let's say we then later add a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6. Well, because it saved your data, it's not going to try to reload the new definition. It'll just completely ignore this. Instead, it will create the definition from the stored player data, which, as you recall, has only 1 and 2. So you will never see the new maps unless you flush your data, delete your save data, and then come back. What we just did was said, hey, no, if it's not a procedural layout, then what we want to do is we want to trust this stored definition as the authority. So if this gets updated to have a 3 and 4, a 5 and 6, and so forth, it will always use the new definition and therefore ensure players will always see new level content that we add into the game. So that will fix this item here right off the bat. All right, so um, fixed. Let's test. All right, I'm just going to put to test. So I've got a solution for this piece here, and what we want to do now is actually test whether that assumption is working or not. Okay, um, yeah, because I believe this code line fixes it, and we're going to check that out. So let's go ahead and look at all these things. Let's just get rid of that thing altogether. I'm just going ahead and checking in some code I made. Okay, that's probably fine. I'm going to probably do these in 2 steps because this first step we're going to do for checking in our code is going to be just about making sure that we replace this hard-coded string with the proper. That was just adding a semicolon. Okay, so we're not going to check in that part, but we are going to check in these parts. That's the actual important code fix. And then this is where we put that level in. Let's go back and look at that one. Story level selector, line 79. Okay. I don't know why I have these other numbers here. Let's just get rid of that. Cool. Okay, let's go ahead and check that in. Okay. Check that in. Okay, let's go ahead and type our commit message. So this first part was just replaced the literal string for identifying a procedural map layout with a hard-coded type for procedural layout. And that's just our cleanup phase. So let's go ahead and check that in as a first step. And then the important code change that we're going to be testing is this block here. So we're going to do a before and after of that. I'm trying to think about how to best surface this in our test. let's think here, Ross. How are we going to do this? Huh? How are we going to do this? All right, well, let's go ahead and I'm going to use the game itself to test it. Okay. Oh, that's right. I got to turn that test thing off. Debug menu, test options. Yes, I'm trying to recreate a situation where I can test how our actual campaign update went down last time and then see if this fixes that issue. Log out. Log in. Okay, so this one's got missions 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, great. Now, what we're going to do is attempt to modify this map and then see if we can recreate the problem and then validate that the solution, in fact, works as anticipated. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go into this guy right here. Okay, and what we're going to do is add a 5th node to it. And I'm not sure what we're going to put in there. Let's just put in, because we're just testing this really. Let's put in the skull and just hit save. There we go. So that skull's there. All right, so that's our test. We're going to save that. And, oh man, I'm trying to think if this DLC won't even be compatible with that game. Client. Okay, let me think a little bit more closely about how I can do this. Okay, now we're going to have to actually republish the entire client because this DLC is not compatible with the current client. So what I need to do is actually republish a new version of the client. Just save that for the time being. Okay, hopefully this is going to work. Okay, file, publish. Get a little stretch going here while we do this. So what this is doing is just creating a new package using all my current code. Oh, did I comment that solution out before I did this? I hope I did. I don't think I did. Oh, see, this is bad because now we have the solution already, and yeah, we're going to have to redo that again. Sorry, guys. Oh, that hurts. All right, because we want to test before and after, and I don't want to invalidate our experiment. So I'm going to comment this block out right there, and I'm going to do that whole thing again. The following file does not exist. Oh, interesting. Probably because I... All right, let's just publish this again. I think I must have moved it instead of copying it. That's fine. Okay, let's do this whole thing again, and there we go. So we're going to compile that. And then we're going to launch the game, and we should see the campaign with the 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're going to drop a DLC into there. So we're going to test a DLC update to that same game client. And what we're going to expect to see is that even though we added a new level, we want to validate the current bug, which is that the map will not update. And then we're going to publish it with the code change we made, and then see that the skull will appear. So it'll be a complete loop on our experiment. We have a set of assumptions. We know we expect what to happen. We want to validate those assumptions happen as expected, and that should confirm that we've in fact fixed the bug appropriately. So let's go into here and launch main. So what this is going to do right now is reinstall the game with the current client version 33. That's the one I'm working toward distributing sometime end of this week, if not early next week, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. There's still a lot of work. Client updates are, I said, notoriously harder than DLC updates. All right, so here comes the game loading. It's loading. It's got to recache everything because of the new version. Oh dear. Okay, this is a problem. For some reason, it's not populating anything here. That's a sign that we have a bigger problem going on. There's something with regards to the client that is causing this not to populate content at all of any kind. My best guess as to what's happening here is that it does not have the Atlas data because I made some changes recently to how it stores these atlases, which atlas is storing those campaign nodes at. And it looks like that story map layout is not storing those assets where we need them. So I'm going to have to fix that really quick. I believe, I think I know what's causing this issue. We're going to attempt to fix this really quick, sidestep it. Okay, thinking to myself where this is stored. Asset loader. Not here. This is HM asset loader? No, let's try to remember what it's called. It's something with assets. Asset loader, here we go. FX and UI. Yeah, this guy. Okay. So I'm looking for something that's stored in the dynamics file. Process card cache, that's it. Okay. So recently I changed everything to point UI for the camp and stuff into this card cache atlas. And the issue we're having right now is that it's looking for those icons in the wrong cache file location. So I have to change those pointers in one of two places. And there's two ways I can fix it. I can either add it to this cache here. It's these node assets. See here, that's the camp UI. It doesn't have access to these node assets. That's my bug. Or I can change it in the actual place where it uses the node assets. And that may be a better way to do it. Let me see if do I reference node assets anywhere in particular? Let's see. Trying to figure out where I actually create those. Oof, okay. Where does it actually create those maps? Story. Somewhere it's going to create node assets. Let's take and search for node asset. Track it down. Definitions editor list. No, it's. Let's look at this def property map again. Let's look at. I believe I had one that opened as a def node. Def property node. Here we go. Okay, so asset name. Let's take a look. This is what we need. Somewhere this is being used to actually create the visual. We're going to find it. Node map view. Here it is. Okay, there it is. This is what we want here. So see that it's using the atlas of this. This is where I need to change it. Instead of it being this atlas, this should be global view dot main view dot. Oof, how do I store that? Game cache. Interesting. It's public, huh? That's it. Okay, this should fix our bug. So the issue was it couldn't create those icons because it didn't know which atlas they were on. Because I changed the other UI to be populated via the card cache large atlas, it doesn't have access to those graphics. So like I said, there's one or two solutions. I think this solution's probably the better of the two. Let us begin republish, and this should get us working again. And then we can learn what needs to be done. Good old compiling. This project used to compile in like 5 seconds. It's gotten so much larger, but I'll give it credit. It doesn't take 2 hours to build, like some Unity games that I've worked on. So it's got that going for it. I can stomach a few seconds here. This isn't too bad. Okay, and that's already done. So we can go ahead and reopen this file, and we should have those icons surfacing now. I may have to adjust the screen size because they should already be in the atlas, so we should see them now. And then if we do, that's a good sign. We can then begin our experiment as planned. Yay! Okay, I love when things work. Okay, great. So now we have the campaign map as expected here. And what we're going to do is drop in a new DLC. So we're going to create a DLC simulation and see if we get that skull to appear. And our assumption is that it will not appear. So how we're going to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just basically create a DLC, a fake DLC, with that new dynamics or the new definitions stored in it. So I need to go to application support. Actually, let's see, go to my local store here. So I'm going to get that definition that's got the new map in it. I'm going to go to Summoner's Fate. I'm going to go to, nope, application support, Summoner's Fate here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically create a DLC inside my app where it's expecting the DLC to be. Drop that in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new DLC by making it think there's a DLC that's been downloaded already. So version 2, and then defs v2. Save. Okay. Begin. So if all goes well, we should see no skull icon in there. Okay? That's what we're hoping to see. We want to see that this is actually manipulating the map as anticipated. What the? Why on earth did it load it from here? Oh, interesting. I had a save game state. I must have been testing with this yesterday. So it loaded it from there. All right, we're going to just back at it. Back away. Oh, dear. I didn't mean to log out. I meant to concede. It's going to load it back into the same place it just was. Oh, dear. Yeah. Let's go ahead and concede this. So it did apply my DLC simulation. So we're going to see if it actually changed that campaign map, and it did. It did change the campaign map. Now I'm a little intrigued as to how that was able to happen. It's telling. Now I do recall that we didn't see this bug actually happen unless the player actually had saved progress toward their campaign. But I'm a little confused as to why it would require progress being saved on the campaign in order for this to function as expected. So let's take a look at this some more because this bug may have more to it than meets the eye. Let's go look at. Oh dear, it's getting confused. It's got too many things open. Oh dear. Okay, I don't know what's causing this to slow down here because I've got the game open, I've got the definitions open. Let's close. I gotta close something down here. I don't know what to close down. I need everything. Oh goodness. I don't know why Flash Builder is slowing down here. I can't take it all. I'm too confused. Close everything. Okay. Let's go ahead and I want to open Camp View. Goodness, this entire thing is running so slow right now, and I'm not sure why that is the case. Something is clearly eaten into the resources. I'm going to try closing this entire thing down and reopening because I can't operate. Maybe I just have too many things open with the stream. We'll go ahead and close down this for now too. And heck, I might as well close down the game itself because we already know that this experiment failed. Alright, I'm going to go back into opening up Flash Builder from scratch and hopefully it can run effectively now. Okay. This is still running really choppy. Like I shouldn't. I just typed some characters to test it, and it's like taking. Why is that pinwheel happening? I hate that pinwheel. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. Okay, I have no idea why I'm getting this incredible system lag right now. Okay, just put it back to how it was, please. We're gonna have to just try and stomach through it. Something on the system resources got bottlenecked and is trapped somewhere, so slowing my system down. All right, but we did have it commented out, so okay. Let's take a look and see when it saves prophecies. So that's interesting. It should have saved that prophecy map immediately here, and when it saved it, it should have prevented it from loading this new one, which is why I'm a little bit shocked as to how it was able to generate that new node. Interesting. Let's see what this does. Okay. Maybe it only saves a prophecy map if there actually is completed data. I find that a little bit hard to believe, but let's just see what happens. Okay, let's take a look at this. If prophecy map is not equal to null, prophecy map dot toString. Let's see if I can look at that actual player data I've got stored and see what happens. I know I can't actually read this binary, but we're going to try to open it anyway because this is nonsensical googly stuff. Trying to see. Yeah, that's not helpful. Okay, let's try something else. Um, Set to false to not save filters at players. Okay, no. Alright, so what I'm really not understanding is why it didn't load the stored prophecy view. So we're going to add some trace statements and then actually see if we can figure out what's going on here. Because I'd like to know how it was able to get those skulls if in fact it was attempting to load a player stored prophecy map in here. Maybe you know what? Let's take another look at something. Maybe when it restores it is the issue. String to data. Let's see. Oh, this is a condition hack to convert existing users to the new data model for first prophecy. Since I store the prophecies within player data, I'm going to need a better way to handle this. Oh dear, look at this is even more confusing. This could have something to do with it too. Oh, okay. This is why it failed because it was looking at the progress stored, and it looks like I was doing a hack for raw data. That would be why. So this here actually looks like it reset it. Def prophecy map dot to object root data dot prophecy map. Oof, this is definitely bizarre. Yeah, this is why. So if I had made progress in the map, it would have stored it. Okay, this is very unusual. Is a hack to convert existing users to the new data model. So there was a old data model in the player data, and then now there's this new one. Very intriguing. This is why data is tricky. If I change how data structures work going in the future, I have to be mindful of how to detect that and reset them going forward. Okay, so without a doubt, this is why it was able to show the new skull, because it retrofitted it back to this new map data. And when I make progress, this would probably be inaccurate then, I'm assuming. Well, you know what? Actually, I'm still not certain, not convinced that this is in fact the issue, because this is still looking at the old data model. I don't know that that's what caused this. Let's take a look at this again. I'll still see if I can figure out any more information here. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and comment that out. And then I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to my DLC. And I'm going to attempt to rename this. Let's just call this DLC2 so it doesn't detect the DLC again. And I'm going to republish this again and see what we get. Oh, you know what? I'm going to think I'm going to run debug mode actually, but one more thing I want to do is we're going to track. Okay. Trace. Okay, create prophecy. Okay. All right. So then what we're going to say is player prophecy is null. Make a new one. Player prophecy is stored. Use stored. So we're going to look at these conditions here to see if we can maybe track down what was happening here. And then in here, one thing I'm going to uncomment this line and this line. I'm going to leave that one out. And what I'm going to do here is say trace, you know, prophecy map hack and see if it was calling that, because I'm just trying to figure out why it didn't, why our experiment failed. Data prophecy map equals that prophecy, create view. Oh, this could have also been it too. There's this whole thing, but that's the ID. Let's try and place this. Trace, reset map to prophecy map. I'm just trying to track any places where this actually changes. Let's see if this is called anywhere else. That would give some more hints. There and there. And the player data, let's see this again. Very intriguing. Root data.prophecy map. Yeah, that's definitely, there's some weird stuff going on here. I can't recall what those hacks were doing. All right, let's go ahead and debug this and see what we get. Enough thinking. Let's go experiment. Stretch again. Good stretch here. Always helpful. All right. Okay, so we should expect to see just those 4 maps again. Expected. Good. Ah. Ah, come on, little text log. What's happening here? Things running so slow. Okay, so we're going to look for prophecy. There's not 21. Okay. Prophecy maps. Prophecy map hack. Interesting. Okay. So that is intriguing to me. It looks like that prophecy map pack was responsible for the issue that we were having, because it somehow did call that. Interesting. Interesting. Interesting indeed. Okay. So that's what was causing our experiment to fail. It was somehow calling this hack in here. I'm not sure as to why I put this in here to begin with. This was something to do with our data conversion before, and that's what was responsible for the data failure. Okay, so what we're going to do now is close this down. Now that we've adjusted that, I'm going to rerun the experiment, and we should see the experiment pass this time. So what I'm going to do is do File, Publish to recreate this as a application. And then we're going to load the game up. It should save the prophecy map. And then when we put the new DLC in, we should not see that skull. And then we're going to republish it again with the new fix, and we should see the skull appear. That's what we want to see to know that it's working. And so that hack is going to need some kind of other workaround. I'm going to have to investigate that separately. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go ahead and launch my, what's it called here? Summer's Fate apps. Okay, campaign. All right, there we go. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now we're going to go ahead and exit this. We're going to update the DLC, and we should see no skull if everything works according to the plan. So let's go ahead and... Which one of these was my test, by the way? I don't remember. Was it this one? Oh, geez. Should remember what I did here. DLC 2, this was created yesterday. Created today. This must be it here. Okay. Now we're going to relaunch the game again and see if it does what I expect it to. Which should be no skull. So this should say 33.2. Good. And now we want to see that it has no skull, which means it's going to resurface the existing problem we have. Okay, and boom. No, there it is again. I am quite boggled as to how that's legitly able to happen. It's very confusing to me. Okay. Weird. Somehow it shouldn't be able to do that. It doesn't explain the bug we had from before. Player data, man, I tell you, that's some complex stuff. Okay, let's change this back to that. Maybe what I need to do is just completely eradicate this shared object. Let's back it up there, and let's delete this. See if I can recreate the bug this way. Now it doesn't know who I am. Okay, so now it's going to load me into the tutorial, since I cleared all my data out. And we're going to just concede this part of it. Okay, and you should see this. Okay, good. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and exit again, put that DLC back in there, and see if we get the bug this time. Okay, so we're going to launch this once more. Now, if this fails, I'm going to try doing it with saving progress and see if it will recreate the bug there, because I know for certain it happened when we... Okay, so this still failed. Okay, so there's definitely something weird going on, and we're going to figure that out. Let's rename this to DLC2 again. All right, so what I'm going to do this time is launch the game, make progress, and see if that affects it. Then we need to figure out why that is necessary. I don't know why it's necessary to make progress to store the map data. It's very strange to me how there's something I'm missing with the code with how this data is being contrived. All right, so the easiest map to beat and make progress on is this one. And we're just going to cheat it to fake progress on it. This is a very hard level to beat normally, and it would take us quite some time if any attempt. Okay, let's go ahead and... Okay, here we go. So I've got my cheat modes on, so I can just hammer on through this to defeat it. Interesting, I gotta reset those prompts. Okay, so now I should see progress on the campaign. I should see a little check mark there, and there it is, good. So now with the check mark in place, interesting as well how that's storing that, okay. Let's log out and log back in. Okay. Okay, that's what I wanted to see. All right, now we're going to launch the DLC and see if that bug happens. All right, so let's go ahead and put this back on there. So we should see if we get the skull this time. And if the skull's there, I'm at a real loss as to what has been causing this issue all along. It's definitely very strange then in that case. Let's see what we get now. Okay, I am very confused as to how that was able to happen without that fix we have applied being in there. That's definitely strange. Hmm. Yeah. I'm perplexed. This doesn't make sense because we had this bug before, and even looking at the code, it doesn't seem possible to have been able to load that data in. You know what we're going to do? We're going to take an attempt to. We're going to do this thing again and say. I'm going to go back to this camp view. So prophecy map. I'm going to search for prophecy map this time. Was it this that was causing it? And prophecy map dot ID is not equal to hard-coded scroll ID. That just doesn't make sense to me how it would be able to do that. Trace prophecy map num nodes. I'm trying to figure out what we can track that would give us a quantification of what it's got in there. I don't want num nodes. I want something different. I want to get the nodes list. There should be a nodes here. Yep. Okay. For I int equals 0, I is less than def prophecy map dot nodes dot length I plus plus. You know, here's what else we're going to do. We're going to trace this prophecy map. We're going to trace it. Trace dot toString toString. So we're going to trace what it looks like. And then we're gonna go ahead and do var node, def node. Okay, trace node dot asset name. Okay. All right. So I need to figure out how it's even happening that this is getting to the what's the problem here? What semicolon are you line here? What are you talking about? Oh, okay. Now let's go ahead and we're going to publish this and debug it and see if we can trace it better this way. All right, so to reiterate what we're doing here, our previous stream we had a bug where when we introduced new content, it did not surface within the player's campaign map. And the reason suspected for that was because the game data was storing a complete recreation of the prophecy map, loading that in, and therefore using the old prophecy map state rather than the new one. So what I'm trying to figure out is how it's able to work and add our skull map in there for us. So we're gonna take a look at this closely and see if we can figure out how it was able to do that. One thing I haven't tried yet is actually loading a different map layout and seeing if that affects it. Ooh, I wonder if that's the issue actually. But then still, I'm not understanding how it's able to load the nodes. So this is still, I'm still at a loss. We're gonna investigate further. There's that prophecy map pack again, but we turned that off, so it shouldn't be doing anything. Player, oh, this is interesting. Okay, so player prophecy map is null. Make a new one. Why is the player prophecy map null? That 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 is wrong. It should have been saving that. Why is the player prophecy map null? Okay, that's the issue. Interesting indeed. Clearly, it should have stored the player's prophecy map data in here. Now I'm very intrigued as to what's going on. Okay. Hmm. String to data. Okay. Okay. So clearly it had a property called prophecy map, and the root data was not equal to null. Hmm. Oh. I see the problem. Okay, now it's interesting. Okay, this is really, really weird what I had done here, it looks like. So this hack, this piece is actually necessary. Um, this is where it actually creates the prophecy map to begin with. So it's taking the string data and creating the prophecy map layout from this piece here. This was in fact required. So this is actually looking to see that the data is correct. Is equal to -1. Okay, is equal to -1. Then recreate it, which means it didn't have this in there. I see. Oh boy. Okay. So here it takes the string to object, creates the prophecy map. So it is in fact the layout changing, which we didn't do in our experiment. Not adding nodes to it, but changing the layout entirely that causes the problem. Because it looks like when it goes to create the layout, let's see here if we can figure out what's happening. Here's the layout reconstructed here. But I'm still trying to figure out where it was able to get the rest of that node definition. That's the other part that it's weird to me. I'm still having a hard time tracking this down. All right, let's look at HM definition loader again. Oops, let's look at prophecy again. This is definitely where it's getting when you haven't touched code in a long time, you have to just like keep digging into this stuff to figure out how it's working. All right, yeah, this is really strange to me still because even though it had the new layout, it's still hmm, okay. So it definitely needs to have that in there. All right, let's test it again like this. All right, okay. So clearly it does need this part in here. That's what's actually recreating the prophecy map from the raw data. But it doesn't explain why it wasn't working for us before either. So that's why it's strange. So loading it again, I should get a okay, the data should be ready now, so let's go ahead and look at that data. Prophecy map is stored, use stored. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to see. So here we've clearly got IDs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. That's how it stored the prophecy map as raw data. So you can see here the structure. So when it stores the structure to it, it literally stores everything about that structure, including, you know, the descriptions of the levels and all that other fun stuff. Okay, now we're going to put that DLC in again. And we're going to republish this. And here we go. So let's see if it adds a skull this time. That's the part maybe it'll work this time now. It won't show the skull. But we're going to still have to try and track it again without the player's data stored because I still want to know why it didn't work the first time we did the experiment because it should have worked the first time we did the experiment. Okay, so here it goes. Okay. All right. All right, there. Okay, so the skull did not appear here. That's what we had expected. All right, and that was the bug we were going to test and validate. So now we know if we were to add our code fix here in the camp view, that this should make it so the skull does appear. That's what we were trying to test to begin with. But I'm going to do the same test again once we confirm that this actually does work. So now skull should appear, and we're going to confirm that. And then we need to go back and do the same test again to try and figure out why it was necessary to have map progress saved in order to have the new levels appear. That's the part I'm stuck on. I need to figure out something about how the operation is working would have allowed the skull to surface when you had not made progress, and that's what's weird to me. I need to figure out the answer. Okay, so we can confirm that that fix we had put in place will work to solve the bug, but we don't know yet why the bug is contingent upon having no local data. So we're going to do the same test again and see if we can figure that out, because I am very confused now as to how that's happening. Okay, so we put that back. We changed the code out. Now we need to change that shared object library again. I'm going to delete my shared.sol again because I want to clear out my progress. Okay, let's do this again. Okay, so I lost my record. I gotta go put myself in again. Ooh, something's lagging there. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go back into this thing here and see what we get. Okay, so as before, we're gonna just verify that's there. Okay, so prophecy map is null, make new one. Great. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna clear this again. Let's go ahead and test something out real quick here. Let's go ahead and what we're gonna do is we're gonna log out, log back in, and see if it says the prophecy map is stored, because that's what I'm trying to figure out here. Okay, let's go look at this again. Prophecy map hack. Okay. Prophecy map is stored. Use stored. Okay, and here it has all my identifiers of what nodes are there. Great. Okay, so everything looks to be expected as so far. Okay. And what we're going to do now is reload this with the DLC in there and see if that skull appears. And at least according to our last test when we did this, it did, which is bizarre. Okay, so now let's see if what happens. Let's see if I can figure out how it was able to add that in there for us. So the supposing bug was that if you had progress on the campaign and you loaded the new content, it would not show the new levels. And we confirmed that with our last test. But the question is, why would it work at all if you had not made progress in the campaign? That's the part I'm having a hard time understanding. And I need to figure that out because it's absolutely critical to understand why that worked. Okay, so here it didn't. It did not show the skull. I did put the DLC in there, didn't I? And let's just verify it's actually saying the new DLC. So here it did work. So clearly whatever it was doing, I must have turned it off and fixed that too. I don't know. I'm at a bit of a loss, to be honest. I'm not sure which step I missed here. Let's go back and check my code changes and see if I can figure out what it was I would have changed even. Okay. What's this doing here? That was just an Atlas change. So I'm going to go ahead and just discard this. This is a separate thing. Okay, so it's not that. It's a separate bug we'll take and flag off later. Okay, oof, there's so much stuff here. Okay, so let's see what we did here. These are just traces, traces, traces. That was getting rid of our fix. Hmm. I'm not entirely sure. Nonetheless, I'm confident this will fix the bug, even though I'm a little still confused as to how we were getting such inconsistent experiment reports earlier. Maybe I simply forgot to comment that line out. I'll have to go back and take a look. But nonetheless, this fix here does in fact take care of our core issue of getting that map to work as expected. So we'll reload this again and show that the prophecy map is correct. That will show the skull. So again, this fixes our immediate problem being able to add new content levels to the game via DLC, because now we showed how we can do that by changing the dynamics, adding new nodes, adding new campaigns. So that's an immediate win for the client updates going forward. I'm still, of course, looking at how I can help enhance this with some other pieces. I still think it's really important we find a way to make it so we can restore from the last campfire. We can store campaigns in general, so we may look at those in a future stream. Um, okay, so here's the skull again. Yeah, so that did work. Okay, so that takes care of the immediate problem. So now we know that this is done. I can say that that's safe. Do not store prophecy map definitions unless it's a procedural campaign. I'd still like to look at these other pieces. Again, these are larger bits of work involved, but we've now got something here that gives us a little bit of work done, gives us something that's immediately useful for the next client, and we had our starting point. So again, to kind of summarize our whole design process, what we wrapped up in this stream here, because I'm going to be closing out here to go to lunch soon. In today's episode, we looked at designing expandable campaign maps with the intent of being able to surface new content to the game to players via DLC. And the reason DLC is important is because it gives players immediate access to new content without having to download new clients. And that saves us the hassle of having to go through third-party review processes. And it also ensures that when we do a DLC update, we know our existing code's going to work. There's no chance of code breaking. Only new content's affected usually by those things. So we showed how we added this little skull level here today. And uh, we looked at and explored some of the various problems with expanding, adding new content to games, such as finite space within this single campaign map, that we might want to have different functionality for how these levels are communicated. We talked about the idea of adding pagination here, and all the different various design problems involved with adding new content to a game of this scope. And then I also talked about the importance of kind of looking for that low-hanging fruit, finding a starting point that gives you an immediate value added to the product that will help with moving the game forward. And so what we chose to do was focus on this first one, which was simply not to store the prophecy map definition, so that we could guarantee that as I add new levels and campaigns, at the very least, players in the next client update will now be able to see those new levels appear without having to worry about clearing their player data like we had encountered in our previous build. And then sort of future thinking, we discovered by reviewing the code, which is one of the other important things we talked about today, was when you go back to a system, one of the things that helps you figure out the starting point is reviewing how your existing mechanics work, looking at the code, looking at the functionality, building that mental model in your head for how those existing systems work so that we can be smart about the changes we're making to give the new functionality we want. And so while we didn't get to necessarily add all that new functionality today, we got one piece done, and more importantly, we were able to build that mental model so that going forward throughout the rest of this week, I can now look at the steps necessary to create paginated supported campaigns, as well as look at some of these other points with how we're storing data to store player data and allow us to get these more granular save points going forward. So those are some of the cool things we looked at today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and being a part of our stream and supporting indie development here at D20 Studios with our upcoming title, Summoner's Fate. And I will be doing this again next week, same time. I look forward to seeing you guys then. We'll have another exciting topic planned, and hopefully we'll be at a place where we're ready to release the client so that we can actually do some DLC updates together as well. All right. And once again, our website, summonersfate.com. If you're interested in purchasing the game in pre-release, you can get it here. We've also got our Discord community links up at the top there. And if you want to watch any prior episodes, those are available on our YouTube channel. All links at the top here. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate it. And I will see you again next week.